Assalamu alaikum. We're joined here today by Daniel Haqiqatjou from the Haqiqatjou, and he does have an online platform as well, the Muslim Skeptic. Brother Daniel, we would call you Daniel. He's a he's a Talib Ilm. He's sort of an apologetics polemic sort of space within the American and Western European Muslim world, but he's fairly popular here as well in Pakistan and India and generally in South Asia, and I suspect maybe in the Arab world as well. You all know him well. Brother Daniel, how are you doing?
Assalamu alaikum. I'm doing good. Thank you for inviting me.
No, the pleasure is all ours. It's an honor. I've been watching you for years now, and I think recently in particular, there was a series of podcasts and debates that you did. I don't know how familiar the audience is with them, but especially I think the PBD podcast, the Patrick Bet David podcast, was particularly I think it gained a lot of traction, and it sort of brought you into the forefront, even though you've been fairly popular otherwise as well. I mean, let's start off with the regular stuff that you deal with. Did you enjoy? Was it a good viewing experience? The opening ceremony for the Paris Olympics.
Yeah, very colorful, imaginative.
Yeah, mashallah.
Yeah, so it was shocking. It was shocking to see that they thought that. I mean, they must have known that it was going to be provocative, that was going to cause outrage. I'm sure they knew that that's the reaction that they wanted. And that's the dynamic that we see with so much of politics. It's like a humiliation ritual. Like they are subjecting us to see this, knowing that it's going to disturb us, it's going to really spit in the face of tradition. And you know that when it comes to, we know that the liberal colonial project, the Enlightenment project, is to destroy religious tradition, to destroy cultural tradition, destroy the family. But even something like the Olympic tradition, even that is not a tradition small enough that they will ignore. They even have to attack the Olympic tradition and subvert it and to make a mockery out of it to show that, yeah, we have no connection to the past. We are constantly going to reinvent. We're constantly going to push the envelope, push what you think is right and wrong and your sensitivities to disturb you. That's their MO. And it was on full display for the Olympic ceremony.
You're saying they, and I find myself saying they a lot as well. Who's they, Danny Bhai?
They are the elite within the Western, you can say northwestern part of the world, Europe, northwestern Europe, America. These are the elites, the 1%. They're highly wealthy, and they have particular ethnic makeup, you could say. It's split maybe 50-50 between Jewish and European Jewish, American Jewish, and then white, Anglo-Saxon
the WASPs,
white.
Right?
The WASPs, yeah, Protestant. So these two groups, these ethnicities, they have certain predilections, they have certain tastes, and they have certain attitudes towards tradition. And so it's not, it's a philosophical attitude that they have, that we have to constantly be pushing liberation. We have to constantly be pushing this idea of liberation for all. Liberate yourself from religion, of course, liberate yourself from traditions, liberate yourself from gender roles, liberate yourself from these kinds of outmoded ideas of sexuality. You have to break from all of these chains. And that's how, this is what gives meaning to their lives. And you even see someone like Elon Musk, who is part of that group of elites. This is his entire philosophy. He doesn't necessarily, he might have this abstract understanding of God. He might have, some kind of vaguely Christian morality, like don't lie and don't cheat. But really what pushes him, like the goal that he sees in life is to liberate humanity. And he does it primarily through technology. That's what he wants to do. Like, okay, we have Neuralink technology. We have this kind of solar power technology with Tesla, etc., SpaceX with outer space. So that's what is driving him, what's driving his innovation. And he's extremely influential as potentially the richest man alive. But even like when in the intellectuals like Jordan Peterson, for example, again, religion plays a very negligible role in what occupies. Yeah, allegory at best. His life is not dictated by any concept of God. But what is driving him is this quest for liberal values, promoting freedom, liberating the human mind from the shackles, emancipation. Exactly.
This is a thing that we talk about here often, and I think Americans would be surprised that we talk about this, at least amongst my friends and the people that I work with, is how far the Overturn window has been pushed even in conservative spaces, that you have transgender conservatives. That one guy, what's his name? The guy who totes guns. You have Jordan Peterson, who essentially is a new atheist. It's just a new version of the new atheist, right? Who's the bad guy? Muslims are, Zionists are great, Israel is really important, and, there is a God, maybe, I guess, I don't know. What do you mean God? What do you mean what? What do you mean you? Like, at best, there's like these vagaries about the divine or the divine spirit or something divine in us. And even on the most conservative end of that spectrum, within the sort of acceptable Overturn window of alternative, and the alternative media is not that alternative anymore, in my honest opinion, as well. Maybe the most conservative character you would have is Tucker Carlson. Even he has these weird ideas about what it means to be a Christian, and you were describing this civilization, this transhumanist civilization that's been ruling over the earth for about 200 odd years. This is what Ben Shapiro would call the Judeo-Christian civilization. This is it. With the Western civilization with Judeo-Christian values. These are what we're talking about. These are not Catholic values. These are not Eastern Orthodox values. These are not Muslim values. These are Judeo-Christian Western civilizational values. And it's very strange for us over here to see that one guy, what's his name? The gay guy who's like a conservative pundit. The one who's like a crazy Zionist. Dave Rubin. Dave Rubin. Yeah. This is insane. How do you have... And then you have this guy... Peter Thiel, who's backing J.D. Vance, who's also a homosexual, and he's a deep conservative, and he's a real Christian, and you have Donald Trump, the figurehead, the actual political figurehead for this whole movement, and he's like this hedonist. He builds tall towers, and he sells sex and casinos, and he's the head of the conservative project in the Western world. So it's very funny for all of us here. Is it as funny over there in the West? Do regular conservative people, Christian, Catholic, Muslim, or the like, do they see the sort of do they see the public humiliation element of this ritual, or are they sort of convinced that this is the future for us?
Yeah, they're totally blind to it, and you have people who are deeply religious. I was just talking to a family friend or someone who is associated with the family, and he is a Christian, and he's in his 60s, older gentleman, and hardcore conservative, but also hardcore Christian, kind of on the evangelical spectrum. And for years he was saying that I've been duped, I've been tricked, I've been so supportive of people like George Bush. I thought this is the warrior of God. God has sent George W. Bush to save the world. And I, have, and even Trump, hardcore Trump supporter. Even I wasn't able to see that, well, this is not a man of God. And now I'm just realizing more and more it's like I've been under a spell, and only recently the spell has been broken. I said, well, how has the spell been broken? He said, well, there's alternative media that I've been consuming more and more online. So I said, yeah, that's the typical story. But yeah, you have this cognitive dissonance that conservatism just means in the US now. It's still tied to the issue of abortion. That's still a relevant issue. Immigration, and then deregulation. We don't want big government, but what that really means for the most part is that
big tech.
You have big tech, you have big pharma, you have all these major corporations that can manipulate the legal system for their corporate profit. And then you have like the people who are most suffering from this corporate malfeasance, supporting more deregulation because they think this is like a conservative value or this is like a godly value. So it's shocking. Like you can see like the power of psychological operations, basically psyops on a population, how people can be so deluded where something that is black, they see it as white and vice versa. And these are also, you know, this is a sign of the end of time. You know, this is the sign of the hour to, and we know from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that the liar will be seen as truthful and the truthful one will be seen as a liar. How can that happen? And the Sahaba, when they heard these signs, they questioned, you know, how can people be that blind? Because we see evil as evil, and evil sometimes has power and they do their evil on society, but we never see them as good. We never see evil as good. But now the most corrupt, the most degenerate, the most hedonistic, they're seen as the representatives of God. They're seen as these saviors that are coming to on behalf of heaven to reform the earth. So it's shocking.
Listen, I've listened to a lot of Christian rhetoric about Trump and the bullet and the assassination and God, and it was so strange. In fact, I remember specifically at the RNC, the convention, Tucker Carlson made a speech at the end of which genuinely it freaked me out, like sincerely from the bottom. I'm not saying this for the camera. He said something to the effect of, I can't say that I am a good man and that I am on the side of God, but I hope that he's on my side, but I hope that I'm on his side. But what I can say is that God is definitely here among us right now. I was like, what the hell is this guy on about? The Spirit of God is what a delusional society. Sometimes I look at them and I see that they think the Spirit of God is at the RNC convention. And this is insane. This is Yani Majnoon talk to me and to people here. And this is, we're deeply religious, spiritual people, Yani the Muslim world. This is like next level. And I hear all this rhetoric. Even Candace Owens, who alhamdulillah recently, she's become like a real Christian. She's become a Catholic, and she was on. She was doing a program about this guy, some evangelical character who predicted that Trump would get shot and it would miss him by inches and it would pierce his ear, and obviously she was skeptical enough. I respect her because she's skeptical beyond the sort of conventional and the unconventional point that you find in the American conservative spaces. And she was like, maybe this whole thing is a psyop. But generally you find that they fall on their faces the moment they hear, prophecy or gospel, or it just I've never seen such religious zeal, And we're the ones who are called the crazy ones with religious zeal. I mean, I've never seen a zeal of like a religious zealotry like the evangelical right in America, the Zionist sort of evangelical right, and the way they've sort of imbibed the spirit, the religious element to the Trump movement. And J.D. Vance, a guy who works for like BlackRock. Sorry, what's the thing called? BlackRock, yeah. And he works for tech companies. And he's working for Peter Thiel, and this guy is the Spirit of God is guiding him. What do you make sense of that? What do you think is going to happen in these elections? Like, as a Muslim, as an American, as a real conservative, would that be appropriate, as opposed to these fake conservatives?
Yeah, Muslims are inherently conservative because we want to conserve the practice of the Sunnah. So even the idea of Sunnah is inextricably conservative. You have to conserve the Sunnah. It's not something that we had in the past and now we have something different. So Muslims inherently are conservative. Now, some might not like the association of that term with Western conservatism. I completely understand that. But if we talk about the core concept of what it means to conserve, then Islam is conservative by its very nature. It's not progressive. The opposite or antonym of conservative is to be progressive. Progressive means that you're constantly innovating, you're changing and adapting and evolving, and trying to. Yeah, you're an innovator. So this is contrary to Islam in its nature and all traditions. Every tradition. It's even postmodernism, for example. Postmodernism, where you have Derrida, for example, Jacques Derrida, these philosophers, or Rorty, for example, they're questioning language, right? That's the essence of postmodern philosophy. Well, what does the language actually mean when we read a text and we read a book? Should we consider the intentions of the author, or do we make meaning as we read it, our own meaning? And this comes, this is what postmodernism is about. Like, we can't just assume that what the author intended with his words when he wrote a book, or when God sent revelation, we can't just assume that the text is bound or constrained or constricted by God's intention. Rather, our intention as the reader matters, is more important, and we make the meaning. So this is an attack on tradition. This becomes an attack on the tradition of language. That language, words have meaning. And when someone speaks, they are expressing their intentions or their thoughts through words, and we can understand what they're saying because the words have meaning. They're connected to the meaning, and that's how we understand the thoughts of others, and that's how language works. But in postmodernism, the postmodern movement, then now you're even questioning the tradition of language, the tradition of, the words have meaning. So that's the extent of this kind of attitude, this liberationist attitude, that even we cannot be bound by
logos itself.
Yeah, by logos itself, by logic, by even rationality is something that is limiting us. And these are like chains. We have to break the chains of even rationality. So it's that kind of pervasive, that kind of progressive attitude. So if you believe that words have meaning, you're conservative. You have conservatism in you. And that's what some of that, maybe, I'm just observing, and you, mashallah, much more than me about what's happening in Pakistan. And but you see some of these liberals, coming from some of these elite universities in Pakistan, they don't really understand where this is going. Like, they think that, being progressive means that, you can have a girlfriend. That's what it means to be progressive. You have no idea the path that you're going on, and it's going to accelerate.
It's not a civilizational, by the way, grand narrative in their heads. It's all about in the here and now. I can drink alcohol. I don't have to go to the masjid, and all these restrictions of sex and gender and social etiquette and blah blah blah. I can do away with it, and it's a kind of hedonism, essentially. It's not a well thought out. In rare cases, it sometimes is, but in a majority of cases, you find that it's a sort of hedonism where they just want to. And at best, it's like a sort of an imitation of the empire. That's it. I want to be like the Romans. That's about it. The Romans are pretty neat. Look at their buildings. They're pretty shiny. The sewer system works. The road's fine. It's a material sort of. I was speaking with one sheikh here, and he primarily does his work in Urdu. He's a master of literature and poetry. He is a philosopher. Ahmad Javed. He's very old, and I'm hoping that we can put out some content with him, because you have to preserve the elders and the buzurg and their wisdom, and this medium is very effective. And he said that what I've found is that, and we're not talking about new atheism. He's saying, he called it Jadid Ilhad jo hai. This is what he said in Urdu, Jadid Ilhad. The sort of the new in the Gen Z that you find. He says it's entirely material. and there is it's not like, oh, is Allah Qadim or Hadis and the body is an accident. It's not like that. It's very material. It's shorter attention spans, and he has this whole grand narrative about subhumanity, about how human beings are sort of being broken down to a point where they're like, this whole cyborg nonsense where we're sort of becoming subhuman, and essentially it's a material effort where you observe the Western excellence and whatever semblance of excellence that they have left, yani. And the response to this, he said, would be good ikhlaq, like good manners, like just model citizenry. You need an ideal Muslim, the manliest of men, and he lots of kids, and he's honorable, and he makes money, and he knows the deen, and he knows mantak, he knows some kalam, he's like an ideal man, and that he organizes power generating institutions, because this is actually young people just bowing to power at this point. They're not infatuated with the ideas as much. They're bowing to where the technology is leading them. And unfortunately, I think the case is true. However, I was very shocked to see Brother Sneeko, of all people. Yeah, one of your disciples, mashallah. Initially, when a lot of these guys converted to Islam, I thought it was more like a prison style, conversion. But subhanallah, I mean, Sneeko is... I saw the thing with him and your... the arch nemesis of intellect, yani Penguin Zero. This was on the subject of sex and gender. I mean, at this point, I think Sneeko's so cancelled that he's not afraid anymore, and he's arguing this whole the grand narrative about about the age of consent. I thought that was really fascinating, because immediately, like at least for the last 20-30 years, you will get cancelled on every level if you question the unquestionable, which is the age of consent. And the way you broke it down also, mashallah, when you reviewed that debate about how they will change up the language when they will talk about premarital sex, and when they talk about actual marriage, it'll become child marriage, and then it's adolescent sex, and very fascinating. But the fact that you two somehow, and you've had this with that one Christian debater as well, skinny guy, funny nose, very Jordan Peterson, like, doesn't really believe,
inspiring philosophy.
Doesn't really believe in Christianity, honestly, at this point. These two incidents I've seen in the past 3 decades of my life, where someone has questioned the age of consent narrative and have not been cancelled. You two have become bulletproof, mashallah. I think, is it some reflected glory that is coming on to Sneeko? How did you manage that? That was insane.
Yeah, well, I've been debating for 5 years now. And when you debate Christians or any group, basically, it'll come up in the debates. They will definitely question the marriage of the Prophet ﷺ to Aisha. It's basically wajib, like it's required that they bring this up. It doesn't matter what the topic of the debate is. They'll bring it up, and so you have to have a response. But a lot of the responses I've found very inadequate. They don't really... Either it's like a denialist response to just deny and say like, oh, there are no hadith, or oh, they had no birth certificates and in that time, so they don't know.
My favorite is when they do the lunar to the solar calendar, the weird nonsense calculation.
Yeah, so these kinds of denialist responses are very weak, and they're inauthentic, because you don't find any kind of discussion of her age being like much older within the Islamic tradition. So when you give a denialist response, you're throwing the Islamic tradition under the bus, the Islamic intellectual tradition as well. So this is a bad route to take. And then another group of responses will say that, well, it was fine for that time period. Like, it's a different time. Now we're in current times, it's not appropriate, but for those times it was appropriate. And that I also find inadequate, because it concedes the whole progressive narrative, the whole question of reform. Because once you agree that, okay, they're a different time 1400 years ago, okay, then why not say the same thing about homosexuality?
Did they have the wheel then?
Yeah, didn't have the wheel.
I saw that thing of you did. That was hilarious. This is also like informed a lot by media. I've noticed that the conception of the medieval peasant is like they're eating slop and they're sort of covered in muck, and they had physical outdoor lives. These people were eating fish and meat, and they were eating good diets, and they were having like 10, 12 kids. They were married multiple times. Like this, it was a very wholesome life, mashallah, people that our ancestors enjoyed. And and every single place on earth was just constantly being raided and pillaged by the Vikings. That is the common perception of the sort of the mouth breathing general public. That the Vikings were everywhere. They were this attacking the Vikings and the Mongols.
You have to have this kind of support for your grand narrative, like the progressive narrative that humanity is on a constant march of progress. So if that is true, because that's what justifies dissolving religion, dissolving traditional norms, you have to justify it by saying, well, we're on this constant march of progress. We're constantly evolving. And okay, if that's true, then that means that people today are so much more advanced intellectually, morally, today, as opposed to 10 years ago, 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago. And so they have to make up a kind of false history that, people just 100 years ago were basically dragging their knuckles or Neanderthals. So this kind of picture is taught in schools, it's taught in schools and textbooks, and it's reinforced in movies and media. So
I was surprised
they have to lie. They have to lie in order to
the reflected
maintain
glory that Sneeko had caught some of it. He was able to challenge the fact that this was his own. This was, what's the guy's name? Charlie, Penguin Zero. That this was Charlie's own gut reaction. It was a cultural taboo. And I think you gave this one weird example of somewhere in South America or South India or somewhere where they don't eat fish when they're menstruating or pregnant or whatever. And that gut sort of visceral reaction to these things that people get. Even I grew up in a fairly conservative household in a conservative country in Pakistan. A lot of these like nonsense ideas about modernity I've had to unlearn over the years, and even to this day, I'm 30, I'm still unlearning a lot of these things. And unfortunately, the way we've conceived sexuality, and then on top of that, the way we organize our civil society and the way we interact with the political structures, everything's been warped. I really do think, especially I think with the sex and gender stuff, because that was the last thing to go. How do you feel as a father? Mashallah, you have kids and you plan to have more, hopefully. And I mean, you have daughters, I suspect.
No.
All right. Allah's protected you from this. But how do you, even boys, how do you expect to raise boys in America and this kind of, although it's as inescapable in a place like Pakistan today as well. But what is the kind of advice that you would give to people? How do you prepare for this? Because you can't expect everyone to go on this journey and then they figure it out, and maybe you end up like a Sneeko or you end up like a Destiny. That's a full possibility.
Parents, they have to. So I have, alhamdulillah, 5 boys. Allah didn't bless us with any girl yet, but the main thing is schooling. Like, so much of the indoctrination comes from school, because children are spending 40 hours a week in this institution. What is that institution teaching? Who are the teachers? What is the curriculum? And in the West, in the US, it's all liberalism, it's all progressivism, it's all worshiping science and materialism, and a kind of a materialistic history of the world. So if you go through that, then obviously what's going to be produced is a materialist liberal. That's the default. So if you want to avoid that for your children, the number one thing that you can do is take them out of that institution. It's a no-brainer. And the other thing is you have to monitor their sources of information outside of a school as well. So one thing that I don't really understand how a parent can do this is giving your child a smartphone. Even when they're 18, or not 18, but even when they're 13, 14, 15, this is not really necessary for them to have that kind of unfettered access to the internet, because especially what children will be drawn to are social media platforms like Instagram, like YouTube, like TikTok. And these platforms are designed, they've actually been engineered to be as addictive as cocaine. They have brought psychologists to make the algorithm and the way that everything is designed within the UI of these social media platforms to make them as addictive as possible, so they spend as much time as possible. For a child whose brain has not really fully developed, and even for an adult, you will be very negatively impacted by having access to these social platforms on your phone. And also YouTube, like YouTube, there was a big expose actually recently. Perhaps you've heard of MrBeast. Like he's the biggest channel on YouTube with over 300 million subscribers.
Yeah.
And now he's being like exposed. He's being attacked from all directions because, and it's fascinating because he's had a squeaky clean reputation. Like you won't find any kind of criminal record. You won't find any kind of abuse or scandal under his name, but now this is all falling apart. One is because one of his main partners in the business came out as transgender. Chris Tyson, he came out as transgender.
He had kids, by the way. You know,
he had a son. He was married and had a son. He basically, wanted to be a woman after all that. Or he was a woman.
Chats, by the way, if you look at the scandal, by the way, the whole thing points to sex pervert because he was watching porn and interacting with all of this stuff. He
with minors.
He perverted himself into becoming this thing.
Yeah, you can speculate about that. And then MrBeast as well. There's been an expose on his business practices because I didn't realize this, but basically MrBeast's channel is a lottery for children, like an illegal lottery. You're getting children addicted to gambling because he'll make promises like, okay, if you subscribe, if you watch the video, if you buy my t-shirt, if you buy my chocolates, you have a chance for winning.
Yeah, we saw the same
big
video.
Prizes.
We saw the same video from the guy who used to work for him, right?
Used to work for him. Yeah.
That was an insane presentation, by the way. That was genuinely a very good presentation about the whole business model.
So that your kids are exposed to this. So then you grow your child, like you have a Muslim child. He's like, oh, you have like age filters, and he's on your phone or using his own phone on YouTube. And then when he's in college, you find out that my Muslim son has a gambling addiction. It's like, where did this come from? It came from you. It came from MrBeast. You would never have thought. You'd have never have thought. And this is the danger of these platforms. So it's very scary as a parent.
It's insane.
May Allah protect us.
I mean, may Allah protect your 5 sons and grant you more daughters and sons, inshallah. And may Allah preserve your family. It's insane. This thing about MrBeast, because it hit home because I know so many nieces and nephews and kids in the family. It's like, oh, they're on the kids platform, right? They can watch MrBeast. And but as an adult, for some reason, there was always like a gut feeling about there's something wrong with MrBeast. You know what I mean? The weird
the weird smile that he has is so insincere.
I would have put him down as a PDF guy, but like the whole gambling thing, I didn't see coming. There was an element of it, and I thought that was targeted more towards adults, but I think that was a cultural disconnect because I didn't realize that how accessible online payments are to kids in the West. Here, I thought, oh, maybe this is for adults because instinctively I thought this is for adults who watch his channel. Although it behooves me to, why would an adult watch his channel? But I guess they do. Young adults, I guess. And then, they can participate in these games or whatever. And then I realized that when you legalize gambling in a society, when you do that, and because it's an unfair practice, you have to create all these big gaming commissions and you have to have all these rules. And those rules are there in the first place for a reason. So this guy is running this whole thing, and essentially an online casino for kids and young adults without conforming to gaming commission laws. And I thought that was a really either this guy is really smart, or I think maybe he stumbled onto a formula and then people, tacked on as managers and handlers who were much smarter than he was. But it's a really insane model. And I suspect that the gravy train might not stop because these guys always figure out a way to leverage these kinds of controversies to, I mean, if Kevin Spacey can make a return, anyone can at this point.
Yeah, he might be too big to fail. It might be a situation where he'll have to make some changes. They'll force him to make some changes, but it's too profitable. Like, it's not just him that's profiting. Like, YouTube is profiting through advertiser dollars.
Car companies and all
these agencies, they benefit from gambling. So, okay, we need to clean it up. Like these, gaming commissions and all the laws, it's still gambling. It's still exploiting people. Like the lotteries, you're exploiting people. You just have to make it a little bit squeaky clean. Like, you have to just make it as palatable as possible. But at the end of the day, even if he follows all of the regulations, he's still going to be exploiting people and gaining profit, big money from that. So,
I mean, Islam is very hard on gambling. We all know this. I mean, and I grew up, this is a funny thing that I would grow up with, is I was thinking, the Quran is constantly talking about gambling, and we would, in the dars or whatever, we'd listen to it and we're like, where is it though? Because I always assume that the gambling that is, is the man on the street corner betting on cricket or whatever, right? But then when I grew up, I realized that the whole system of economics is pretty much gambling, from literal casinos to the gaming commissions to the stock market, and it's a very strange thing that, and I think it's implicit in the fact that they want to build gaming commissions and have all these complicated laws and rules and regulations, is because they know deep down that this is something that's exploitative.
It's gambling where, especially when it comes to the highest levels, some of these hedge funds, for example, some of these other funds that you find on Wall Street, they, like Goldman, for example, Goldman Sachs or JP Morgan, whoever, they're gambling, but it's gambling where if you win, you win, and you win big. If you lose, you still win.
Because you're too big to lose,
Yeah, because the government will come in and bail you out.
No,
using people's money.
Yeah, 2008 was an eye-opener for me because I was at that age where, you're sort of figuring things out and you started thinking about things outside of yourself. As much as 9/11 was a big deal, I was much smaller at that time. But the fact that the government was there to subsidize this risk-taking behavior, this gambling behavior with the mortgage-backed security, and then figuring out for the first time what the heck a mortgage-backed security is was a bit of a nightmare, I remember, as a teenager.
Yeah, it's deliberately convoluted. It's deliberately complex so that the average person really can't understand, and the average person can't participate, because you still have to have a semblance of a equal playing field.
Yeah.
So, okay, there's equality. So if a Goldman banker can engage in this, so should, you and me. A person on the street take advantage of this, but we can't because we don't have the ability to understand unless we go into that and study it. And then we also have to study the law, but we don't have the time. We have to hire lawyers. We can't afford the lawyers to be able to, the finance lawyers to be able to understand this and navigate all of the complex legal system. So the only people, so even though it has this facade of, it's an equal playing field and anyone has the opportunity to pursue the American dream, in practice, only the elite are able to engage in these kinds of exploitative financial transactions or financial instruments. It's reserved for them. And this is just inherent corruption of the capitalist system. And it's the Wall Street bailouts, the financial collapse in 2008 that impacted millions globally, if not hundreds of millions globally, pushed many people into poverty. Many people lost their homes. Many people lost everything because of that. Meanwhile, the people who were responsible for this financial collapse in 2008 on Wall Street and in these banks, they got a golden parachute. They got a major bailout using government funds. So this is rank the worst kind of corruption, and many people will not see it as such, which is the other injustice.
I was watching this thing, Sheikh Abdul Hakim Murad, the one from the UK, Timothy, I think his name was Timothy Winters, before he converted, mashallah, and he very esoteric sort of genteel Sufi guy, and he was talking about the Olympics actually, and I thought was really fascinating was he and the conversation obviously because it was built around the idea of gender and sex in the modern age, and he described it the Olympics as a sort of the pilgrimage of the body, very fleshy, sort of mundane. And it was a very fascinating, sort of big brain kind of take. I liked it. He does these grand narrative things from time to time. And he said something really profound, and I think we all think it and we all sort of believe it implicitly, but we don't sort of vocalize it. He said, in the Niger, the average amount of children that a woman has is like 6.5. And civilizationally, even if we're just flesh, even if in a materialist sort of construct we're just, we're our evolutionary impulses and blah 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 blah, why aren't you having sex and having kids, right? Isn't that the sort of ultimate, the literal purpose is to pass on genetic material? And then how is it that you're such an advanced civilization with these complex economic functions and these ridiculous, it's almost advanced physics at this point, right? The market, study the market. But the people in Niger have figured out they need to have 6.5 kids per woman. Like, aren't they sort of more evolved in that sort of material sense where they're fulfilling their genetic functions as just products of evolution? I thought it was really fascinating. Aren't they happier having more kids, eating more calories, whatever?
In one sense, it is a seeming contradiction between, antinatalism in the West, like not wanting to have children, low fertility rates, low birth rates, and then also promoting evolution. Seems like a contradiction, but when it comes to liberal thought, the ultimate goal is to achieve immortality. Why? Because immortality is the only way that you can maximize your pleasure, your hedonistic pleasure. If you want to enjoy delights, bodily delights, well, that death is what is going to end all bodily delights. As the Prophet ﷺ has said in a hadith, it is the destroyer of all pleasures is death. So how can you delay death? How can you use technology, pharmaceuticals to actually prolong the average lifespan of a human being? And then maybe how can you even achieve immortality? Through uploading your mind to the cloud, your consciousness to the cloud.
But have you seen that guy?
Which one?
The really pale guy who's like, I have spent millions of dollars to fix my whatever. And that guy looks sick.
Yeah.
He looks sick and unhappy. Yeah, the obsession with the just escaping the flesh, becoming this transhumanist sort of agenda. Yeah, I think one of the pushbacks that I was talking about with someone about this thing that I saw with Sheikh Abdul Hakim, and the pushback that he was saying, materialism, you can define your own identity and you define your own goals and blah blah blah. It's all subjective, so don't take it so literally. But I think a more apt sort of grand narrative thing is it's ultimately immortality. Is escaping the confines of the human body, of the natural experience, essentially. And so they argue a lot that when science fiction, which is the sort of the forward facing, the cutting edge of this civilization, which is where they develop ideas and then they back it up with the technology, and that's the common argument, right? A lot of these guys will argue that we're on the cusp of it because we're theorizing in science fiction, even in science literature, scientific literature, that we're on the cusp of it. That biochemically and through all these processes, we're just at the cusp of it. Either that we biologically never age, or we control or mitigate for it, or that we escape the physical, the biochemical plane, and we become data in a computer or whatever. And that you guys said this about the internet, and you said this about space, and you're always like religious types. You guys are anti-progress and anti-whatever, and of course there's many simple sort of dissections to this. I'm not asking like what the arguments would be, As a human being, do you feel, does that ever shake your ideas about the conception of reality that you have? That, oh, maybe maybe they're onto something. Maybe we can escape this whole situation. Does that ever bother you?
I was disturbed by the sudden rise of artificial intelligence, AI. That was, and I was using it myself, just like ChatGPT, like playing around, and it surprised me and caught me off guard that it was so advanced, seemingly advanced. Then I kind of cooled off on it. It's had some severe limitations. It was very clear that, okay, this is not exactly what I consider intelligence. I don't see like real intelligence here. So, and a lot of people have, like, the stock market has also cooled off on AI. Like they've stopped pouring money into AI because they realize it hasn't really delivered on some of the promises it was making earlier in 2023. So that's always, it brings you back. They will announce, like, with this a lot of fanfare, that we have this new groundbreaking technology that is going to usher in the new age of humanity, the next step in evolution. And they make a big show about it. But then you realize that, okay, it's not actually what they were claiming, what they're presenting. If we look at the biggest technological innovations in the past 200 years, things haven't really advanced to the extent that you would expect. Like, if it is really this constant linear or even exponential growth or progress, then, the airplane, for example, it was developed at the turn of the 20th century. Within 50 to 60 years, they developed the rocket technology to go into low Earth orbit. It's, it's been 75 years since the rockets were invented and low Earth orbit was achieved, about 80 years. So actually going to space is closer to the invention of the airplane than we are to the invention of rockets. So how come, things have not advanced at a kind of linear rate in terms of technological innovation, just with like
even at the linear rate, right?
Even at the linear rate, it has not advanced. You could say the computer, this was a big jump. This was like a quantum leap in human innovation. But where is the real big innovation beyond that? That we see? Like, okay, you can make the processor smaller and smaller and smaller, and that follows like Moore's law for processing space, but computing power. But it's still, that's just a quantitative change. It's not a qualitative. There's like a big hullabaloo, big fanfare about quantum computing. I don't know if you remember that. I remember that. Where are the quantum computers? Like, this is just something that you see in experimental physics. Like, it can only be achieved in the lab. Just recently, there was a big news stories about superconductors at room temperature. That was like the big innovation that is supposed to generate, levitating trains, levitating cars. You can create fusion power using these room temperature superconductors rather. But it turned out like it's a hoax. Like the lab that put out the results, like they fudged the numbers. It's not really the case. So that kind of innovation that we're supposed to expect from constant progress, it hasn't really borne out. So I do think that there are going to be more technological advancements in the coming decades, and they're probably all going to be really bad for humanity as they're trying to achieve this transhumanist future. But is it going to be something that is so beyond like the human experience, such that we're no longer going to be human, and it's going to be more like some of these sci-fi depictions of the future of humanity? No, I think that that's never actually going to be achieved just by judging the past 100 years of technological innovation.
That's a fair answer, because even if you look at those robots that Boston Dynamics used to put out, Hyundai ended up buying them, and they're in Korea somewhere, and the whole IP is, this is it. They turned out to be complete nonsense and a Ponzi scheme. People putting money into it, and they kept growing and growing and growing and shifting hands with investors. And eventually, someone had to. It was like a game of hot potato, and you don't see videos of them anymore because, well, they were garbage. But
Yeah, they
initially,
just
when
had
they
that
came
one
out,
dog, right? They had a dog,
yeah,
and you can like tip over the dog and it'll balance itself.
And
That
then
was from like 12, 13 years ago.
Initially, when they came out, yeah, they freaked everyone out, and everyone was like, it's from the Terminator. It's what was that? What was that? It's what's that company called? Starlink, OneLink, Starnet, something like
Skynet,
that. Skynet. Yeah, it's Skynet, and these dogs, and it was complete bullshit. These dogs were fake and gay, and it turns out that it was a lot of it is marketing. That's what I figured out. And honestly, it's I've become jaded to these things and cynical. Like, I don't have that wonderment like that young people sometimes teenagers might have, where they're like, oh, the new thing came out, and I think it's good.
Yeah, look at like warfare too. Like warfare.
Yeah.
Has warfare really progressed in the past 80 years, like since World War I or World War II? You still are using bullets and you're like blowing things up. Like you can have a bigger and bigger explosion, or you're more targeted, but it's still, you're killing people through an explosion, or you're putting some chemicals, in the weapon, like you're burning down large portions of cities, but you haven't really advanced technologically in terms of even killing people. So like even the most advanced, we're developing like nuclear capable tanks that are impervious to any that are armed with lasers, and none of this has materialized. Even though they claim to be working on it, they claim that they've spent billions of dollars in R&D to produce these kinds of weaponry.
Yeah.
Or like satellites, like from space, they'll use a laser from space to blast all of the insurgents. Very targeted with zero civilian casualties. Okay, where are these weapons in actuality? And it seems like it's a paper tiger, or it seems like there's a bubble. Like we're talking about the economic collapse. I think there's just a big bubble where there's this kind of expectation that there's so much technology that exists.
There's also just straight up corruption. I mean, these institutions, these big weapons companies, if that's the example we're giving right now, or the tech companies even, because they're as involved in the military industrial complex as the actual weapon makers. It's just a big, bloated, sort of incestuous, sort of, it's just those few thousand people, and money's passing around hands, and they're having meetings and they're making decisions, and then essentially a lot of them end up just being big marketing schemes. And even if you want to look at something that's really fake and gay, like look at the city of the future, right? The smart city. What a complete sham, it was, this whole thing. In fact, I don't know if you've seen Gremlins too. Have you seen Gremlins? Did you grow up with Gremlins?
No.
Well, what kind of American are you?
I know the concept. Like it's a little troll.
So in Gremlins 2, they go to some kind of mall of the future, and it's a smart mall. And that's a really like a futuristic concept from a movie from the 80s or the 90s or whatever. And now then you eventually and then it was what we conceive of a smart city. There's cameras everywhere, and everything is opens with gestures, and very, very, very similar to what we have right now as a smart city. And if we look at the Gulf, and that's all I'll say, I won't point out the specific smart cities because we all have to make Hajj and Umrah and the like. I've made Hajj myself, but I don't want to risk your chances of it. But let's just say smart cities in the Gulf, right, or in China, or these big brain ideas about making these, where the sewerage is all smart, and then we can analyze the poo content and figure out what's the macrocaloric intake of the population, and blah blah blah. A lot of these things, when you actually talk to people who worked in these countries on these projects, it's mostly like marketing and PR guys who are spinning out these 3D renders and models, and the actual engineering departments are empty. And these things are just pie in the sky. And I'll give you an example that's maybe safe. The Burj Khalifa, right, the tallest building on earth. every day like 40 or 50 trucks go there to get the sewage out. It doesn't have like a real sewage system, and the base of it. And I worked in the UAE a lot for business when I was a while back. The base of it is in loose sand, so they have to water it with thousands of liters of water to keep the thing stable every day. And subhanallah, yani, these things are, and this is the city of the future, and everything's smart and smart gate and smart this, and I think some of that marketing, some of that stuff has died out. People, do you remember smart homes? Did you guys ever get that craze of the smart home?
Yeah.
What a ridiculous.
Yeah, a lot of people were on board with that kind of idea of have everything be smart, but there was this kind of people falling off of the bandwagon. Why? Because of COVID. Because with COVID, you had the government telling people to stay at home and to be locked in. And for how long, we don't know. It was initially just for 2 weeks, then it expanded to a month, then 2 years, basically, almost 2 years of being locked up and isolated. And you don't have symptoms, but not having symptoms is one of the symptoms that you're infected.
You're asymptomatic.
That's one of the symptoms. You definitely have it if you're asymptomatic.
Did you get the Kung flu at one point?
The what flu?
The Kung flu. Did you get it at some point?
No, I didn't.
I actually did.
I did get it.
You were asymptomatic?
No, I had symptoms, but I thought it was just a flu. Then it had some weird symptoms. Like at one point I did feel, I had my sense of smell, but I just felt like at one point my breathing was a little bit more labor, like it was harder to breathe.
Or like when you have a lung thing, right?
Yeah, like some kind of lung thing. So I just took some vitamin D and zinc, and I got better, alhamdulillah.
Yeah, honestly, I got over it in 2 days. I couldn't smell for 2 days, and I had like a low grade fever, and then it went away.
Yeah, so they were locking people down. So if you have a smartphone or you have a smart car, and the central control is with the government, then they can enforce you to be completely immobile. They can lock the doors to your house, make sure that you don't exit. Like that's the nature
spooky.
of all of these technologies, is that it creates centralization, that there's centralization of power, and the kill switch or the button, the control board is with the central government. They control it. So they can increase their surveillance, they can increase their control of the population, and that's not something that anyone wants.
I think they overplayed their hand, or maybe they were too quick to play their hand with the virus TM. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That was maybe a little bit of an oversight on Bill's part. He should have he should have thought this one through, because it did have a reaction. I've noticed that a lot of older people in Pakistan who think that breakfast is the most important meal of the day, and then you have to eat jam and bread and all this processed garbage. You know what I mean, right? Cereal. And that generation, slightly below the boomers, the first time that anything shook them was the virus. They were like, what? We have to do what now? This is my ninth booster.
They became conspiracy theories, you mean?
Yeah,
they're all like in America. You have like a lot of these boomers. You have who are normies, like they're normies, but then because of the shenanigans with the virus, they got woke, basically, in the sense of, okay, maybe everything we watch on the nightly news is not fact. Maybe, all these. So they start questioning 9/11. They start questioning the JFK assassination. They start questioning the moon landing. Even though they've been boomers and they have not questioned any of these things for the first 60 or 65 years of their lives, now suddenly they're like online, on the forums, going through like, oh, did you know that this Lee Harvey Oswald wasn't the actual assassin that took out JFK? Did you know? I was like, we knew about this, but welcome on board the conspiracy club.
No, this is also like this. I think it's been a really weird experience the last 5 or 6 years. Me and some of my friends and my brother, we were something you would have called like conspiracy nuts or whatever, like these kinds of. And then seeing everyone around us sort of, get shaken up with the virus, and then the Ukraine war, and then just subsequent like back to back just big. And I think the next big thing that's gonna come is and I have a friend of mine who was saying, actually, just a little mention, before what started happening in Palestine, about a year from that, he said, I think 9/11/2 is about to happen. You know what I mean? And he called it 9/11/2. I thought it was really funny.
The sequel.
And, the sequel, yeah. The sequel, yeah. So it's just though, I just think that sometimes I feel afraid that it's a bit too late. And everyone's hooked to the phones. I mean, even if you talk to these guys who are making money right now in places like Pakistan, it's all this like drop shipping nonsense, and I'm on Amazon and I'm on this thing and I'm on the other, and there's a complete dependency on these digital fiefdoms, right? As serfs, we sort of bring our labor, we bring our seeds, and we plow the fields, but the cream, the butter and the ghee and the sort of the milk, it goes to the master, Amazon or a Facebook marketplace or whatever. Sometimes I think it's a bit too late. Like, this idea of because even these alternative spaces get co-opted so quickly. You saw QAnon in America. I mean, you see the flat earthers, these nut jobs. All of these characters, you see them, and then you realize how easy it is to even manipulate these channels. And then you see someone like Tucker Carlson, who's like been a Fox, neocon, Iraq War was great, whatever character, and now he's an alternative media person, which is hilarious to me, right? That this is an alternative media person now. And even Joe Rogan, for example, he gets like however many $100 million for Spotify, and he's alternative media. It just seems like a big game at this point, and I feel like maybe it's a bit too late in the first world as well as in the global south, in the third world, or whatever you want.
Too late for what?
It's a bit late for waking up, in that there's nothing much that you can do about it as an individual. And it's really hard to extricate ourselves from a lot of these systems. It's really hard to physically come out of them. And you're going to conduct your business online, and you're totally dependent on the phone and the computer and, on the infrastructure that exists. It's a bit disheartening. What do you, I mean, not to bog you down, but like, what do you recommend? Like, you live in particularly difficult circumstances, because a lot of people that will be listening to you right now would be in Muslim countries, right? You live in particularly, what is it, something that helps you out and you think is an effective way to organize? The old-fashioned way, meeting people face to face, is that helpful? What is it?
When we look at Islamic eschatology, like the history of the end of times, what is going to happen, it's in Islam, it's pessimistic. It's pessimistic that knowledge is going to continuously degrade, because Allah is going to take knowledge from people. How the scholars are just going to we're going to pass away, and they won't be replaced by new scholars, basically. You have this idea where the Prophet ﷺ is mentioning that there'll come to a time when some people don't even know what La ilaha illallah means. They only have heard it and they don't actually know the meaning. So things are just degrading. And that's like a pessimistic view of the end of times. But there is some optimism there within it. Why? Because we know that there's going to be Imam that comes, the Mahdi that comes. We know that Isa alayhi salam is going to come. Jesus Christ as the Messiah is going to return. So there is this one blip, or this one period that is very optimistic, that Islam will win, that the Muslims will be at the top. This return to glory that the Prophet ﷺ has promised will come before, other bad things happen. And then that's the end, when Qiyamah comes. But so it's like, when you think about the end times, it's a mix of pessimism and optimism. You have to be balanced with both. So that's why I don't think about it as, it's too late or nothing's going to happen. We have to have this kind of optimism that, we can be a part of the generation that is the precursor to the greatest times and the return to glory. Like, we can be a part of that. We can be, and we should have that kind of mindset, the optimistic mindset. And this is also the statement of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who it's a famous hadith that if the world ends and you're in the middle of planting a tree, finish planting the tree, even though the world is ending. So we can never be fully pessimistic about the course of history and what we can do as an individual or as a collective. We have to just continue doing our work, doing what is required of us, doing da'wah, trying to break away from this system, these institutions, develop our parallel institutions. I think there's so much opportunity for that, can be very effective. As we're discussing, like a lot of the control that is exercised by these powers, it's like a paper tiger. It's very, it's not that difficult to for those systems to fail at a catastrophic level. So we should keep that in mind and just rely on Allah first and foremost.
That's a great answer. It's a beautiful answer. And in a paper tiger, you can poke holes in it. It's pretty. And I think some of the positive out of this is that the seams have started to show for a lot of people. The seams within the system, Ivy League universities are not as respected. When I grew up in Pakistan in the sort of upper middle, lower elite, whatever class, social class, the idea of getting into an Ivy League school and people would work hard, and that's maybe some of the people you met in college as well, from South Asia or wherever. The prestige of these institutions, just as an example, the validity and the sort of the godlike divine power that the UN had at one point, the Nobel Prize, the institution of the Nobel Prize, right? The Discovery Channel, even just the more mundane sort of the National Geographic, right? The Discovery Channel is like running the History Channel, right? That's like new age religion 101 right nowadays. It's just like, what if aliens were our creators and all that, all of these mainstream institutions, the governments, the Western governments, human rights law, international law, all of these things have become, I spoke about more sort of personal things than then sort of larger scale. I think the seams have started to show for these things. I mean, you saw with the ICJ hearings that were conducted and that were pursued and initiated by South Africa. That was a big sham. Nothing will come from it. Nobody expects anything to come from it. There's no coverage of it. Nobody cares about it. And even though we would like a resolution for the Palestinian people, but the sheer fact that institution has been so exposed, and I spoke about this with my friend. You remember the Will and Grace times? So at that time, it was such an overwhelming idea to argue that homosexuality within a private capacity is like an evil thing to do. It's social evil, except without an appeal to the divine, right? Just arguing in a general rationalist sort of way was very hard, and it felt overwhelming, and it felt like maybe at this point, people felt that they were wrong. But now that whole thing is played out on its own. And it has come to its own ridiculous logical conclusion with the Paris Olympics, let's say. You don't even have to argue with it. You don't have to debate it anymore. You just have to point at different things, and intuitively the person knows that this thing is absurd. I mean,
this is what we need. Like, we need more and more disillusionment with these Western non-Muslim institutions. The more disillusionment there is amongst Muslims, the more emboldened Muslims are going to be, not only to create their own institutions, but also strive to become the leaders, to become the dominant force in the world. And we have that power. We have the physical power. We have the brain power. And we should look to the model of the early Islamic history. We might have thought, if some of the Muslims today were alive at that time, that, well, how can us as Arabs or Muslims in the desert match the power of the great Persian Sassanid Empire or the Romans? Like, how can we match them? Like, this is, they're over the Byzantine. They're overwhelming. But we did it. It was done. I mean, we didn't do it, but our predecessors did it. The believers were able to overcome and to dominate and to establish the Islamic empire that has, that lasted centuries. So why can't we have the same kind of attitude, that same kind of zeal, that same kind of passion to accomplish great things. It can't be done if we're under the spell of the West, under the spell that, well, we can never match them because they have this and they have that, they have these institutions. That is all just an illusion that's been created. But the reality is that Muslims have the power. Muslims have, even in something as simple as birth rates, the ability to reproduce yourself is one of the most basic components of survival, the survival of any civilization. And we see that the birth rates are under replacement levels for all of the Western world, and even some Asian countries who have, at this point as well.
Korea is like half a kid per couple.
Exactly. So we have to make a choice. Are we going to recognize that we have this control, or we have this ability to control, this ability to grow and dominate, even on just a simple issue like birth rate? Because if your population in Europe is going to die out because your women are not having enough children, because they're empowered feminist bosses, then your girl bosses, your civilization is going to, just be extinguished by your own doing. And Muslims, we don't have that problem yet. If we start adopting more and more of these feminist attitudes, we buy into this lie of feminist empowerment or being girl bosses, etc., then we're going to follow them down the lizard hole. Or we can choose a different path, the Islamic path. We can be disillusioned and realize that, well, these ideas, ideologies, philosophies of feminism or freedom, emancipation, this is all garbage. These are lies. We're going to follow Islam. That will be the driving force for success. Sure. Not only in the akhirah, but in terms of very practically in terms of dunya. And if you, as an individual Muslim, you want to have a part to play in the coming of a khilafah or coming of Islamic empire, the new Islamic empire, you can do that as an individual by simple decisions that you make, like a decision on who to marry, for example, if you're a brother, or how to raise your daughter. Are you going to raise your daughter as a feminist? Are you going to push your daughter into Western style education? Or are you going to empower her to be a mother and a wife and teach her those kinds of traditional gender roles? Like that's a decision that you can make in your life. If you're a woman as well, you can decide like what kind of role do you want to play? Do you want to abide by traditional gender roles or not? That has a very tangible impact on the future of Islam, on the future of the ummah. You as an individual can make that choice. And this is just one example. I'm not saying that everything is birth rates, but we have to be disillusioned. That's why, the website that I founded many years ago is Muslim Skeptic. We have to be skeptical of these Western institutions, and that skepticism leads to disillusionment. That we recognize that the emperor has no clothes. Everyone is saying that the emperor is dressed so beautifully in the finest robes, but we have to have the bravery.
The emperor turns out to be like painted blue, dressed up like a baby on a big spread.
No, well, the actual fable is that the emperor is completely naked.
No, but it's
no paint.
It's painted blue at the back. What was that big blue baby thing? What the hell was that?
Big blue baby? I don't know what that is.
This one guy, this one obese, like bald man was with the red beard was painted blue and dressed up like a baby.
Oh, in the Olympics.
Yeah, it was very obscene. Very obscene.
I don't know what that is.
I thought as a connoisseur of these things, maybe. But no, I mean, I think you're right. And on the individual level, we can. However, this is my observation living in a Muslim majority sort of world. I think we've coasted up until now. Now we might have to take, because I think we were on the fitrah and our deen is on the fitrah and we were sort of functioning just normally how humans would. Some were bad, some were good, but overall the society would sort of balance that out. But now post, I think the internet and what we have on our hands right now, I think we're going to have to make more of an active effort to reimagine ourselves within the context of the modern world. Reimagine the family unit in the context of how we want it to be and how Islam wants it to be. Because now I think people below the age of 40 and 30 might not be able to coast just as their parents or their parents did before them. even in the Muslim world. Now we might have to take active measures to seek out women to marry who want more kids and who are inclined towards deen, and then young men will have to take time out to, educate their kids, homeschool them, maybe pull them out of institutions. We wouldn't have had to do that maybe even 20, 30 years ago. But now I think even with the food stuff like the microplastics and the weird chemicals in the fake food and the internet and iPhones and tablet phones and all these gadgets, and I think we might have to make an active measure. When I was growing up in the 90s, I mean, there was the technology lag was so great. I was watching films from the 70s and 80s when I grew up. Because
that's why Gremlins.
Yeah, you guys had
about Gremlins.
Yeah, you guys had VCD or DVD, and we had VHS, right? But now the technology lag has been flattened with the internet. If a kid in Korea is watching some silly Korean soap, so is a kid in Pakistan, right? At the same time, same frequency, same time, same release dates or whatever. And I think conventional masculinity has to be sort of taught. Something that was implicit has to be actively taught with structures, and this is what you do and with do's and don'ts, and because it's not something that's going to be a given now. Even with the fashion.
Yeah, when you look at like spirituality, for example, tezkiya is a purification process. So the idea is that or like a lot of the Sufi thinkers, they understand the heart as like a mirror or like something very clean and shiny. And then sin, and we know this from hadith, is that it creates these black dots or these blemishes on the pure heart. So if you really want to, spirituality becomes a process of cleansing the heart, cleaning and polishing the heart, and returning it to its original pure state. And tazkiyah, like cleansing. And with modernity and this kind of colonial, internalized colonialism that we see from a lot of Muslims, it's a similar thing. You have to cleanse these ideas. You have to purify yourself from these kinds of biases or these kinds of narratives that have been transmitted through education or TV or whatever. And then when you cleanse that, then the pure fitrah comes through. The pure fitrah, the purity of the kind of Islamic soul, it comes through. And you see, you get that kind of dhawq or lidha, or like the pleasure of the Quran and following the Sunnah and abiding by it and living that in your life. If you have been tarnished with these ideologies and these blemishes, they cause a mental block. I don't really, I want to enjoy the beauty of the Quran, but I get to a passage that talks about slavery, or even, when Allah is saying that, that there are slaves, that his creation are slaves. We are slaves to Allah. Well, I have a problem with that. Why? Because we have to be free. How can I be the slave of someone else? And I prefer the term servant. I don't translate it as slave. I prefer servant. Like this kind of bias, like this is a liberal bias.
I don't know who you've been talking to, my guy. I don't know who these gay guys are.
Yeah, this is what we have in America. So may Allah protect us. But that kind of attitude, like I want to enjoy the Quran, but this one concept of slavery, it disturbs me. Whether I'm a slave of Allah or we're talking about milk yamin or whatever it may be. So you can see very clearly how ideology prevents this attachment, spiritual, emotional, psychological, with the Quran, with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, with the Sahaba. So when that is cleansed, when that is cleansed and purified, then that we can return to a much more effective state as a community of believers, as an ummah.
There's some questions that people had, Talab al-Ilm and the Dawah Bros and people just generally who follow you in Pakistan. And one of the things it's a bit probing, is that how did you personally get into this apologetic scene, and what was the development? What does it look like when you develop your methodology for research and debate, and what's the strategy that you work with, and how do you pick out, you're very good at one thing, and that I'll get that I think is universally accepted, is that the marketing of it. You pick out the right guys to call out. You're a master at throwing down the gauntlet. What was the process? How'd you get into it? Maybe a little bit of your background as well. Growing up in America, and just very quickly.
You give me this huge question, and you say
Just very quickly. just
just a sentence, summarize all of that. Yeah, so I became practicing later in high school, and then in college, started learning more. I also went from being Shia to being Sunni in high school, actually, and that was the influence of friends, Muslim friends, and then also doing my own research and analysis. Then in high school, in college rather, it was a very combative environment, especially at that time. I went to Harvard University, and it's filled with the most liberal types, liberal non-Muslims and Muslims.
Maybe not as bad as a Yale, maybe.
Yeah, well, Yale is a safety school, but
don't say that.
That's
my sister will send you an angry email, ma'am. She went to Yale.
Yeah, so that's just bickering between Harvard and Yale. But it's a very combative environment.
And you were at Harvard in the early 2000s?
Yeah, in the 2004 to 2008.
Nice.
I graduated in 2008, wow. So did a bachelor's degree there.
In physics and philosophy, right?
Yeah, physics and philosophy. So the environment was very conducive to debate, or it was conducive for me at least. Maybe other people don't like debate, but I'm just
I've noticed that you're very built for it. You don't get phased, mashallah.
Yeah, and I just hate people who are smug and arrogant about their stupid ideologies, and
I think also
especially when they're attacking Islam. Like, so they're
really
combative against Islam. What was that?
I think what I've noticed is disingenuity in the arguments really, like, it rubs you the wrong way. I've noticed that you get riled up by that, by that sort of the smugness of the new atheists is something that you just want to smack out of their faces. I agree with you. It's such an insufferable sort of disposition as a human being, and even if you disagree with someone. Even if you completely detest Islam or Christianity or whatever, it's the smugness that it's so inhuman, it's so antisocial, it's demonic, it's so
the only place
unnatural.
That smugness is appropriate, I think there are places where smugness is appropriate only as a response to smugness. If you are going to be smug in criticizing Islam and pretending like you are so much better than the Quran and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then you have given us the ticket, the golden ticket, to be arrogant and smug with you, to put you in your place. But if you're not arrogant, if you're not smug, then we should never be smug and arrogant. We should come very humbly, and we speak to you with respect and with decency.
And with love.
But
with love.
Yeah, and so that's part of my
maybe not
bad.
The love part. I'm a debater.
Yeah, maybe sometimes you can have love, because what if it's a family member maybe that you want to talk to about Islam, or your wife even, you might be married to a Christian or a person of the book, right? So, but this is the bad characteristic that I have, is that I really enjoy the debates where the opponent is rude. Where the opponent is rude, because that gives me the ticket to reciprocate. So maybe that's not the best tendency to have.
Do you think Persian being a high culture, you're sort of like a sarcastic sort of people, a very flowery, you know what I mean? Is that a cultural thing that you picked up?
Maybe.
It is a high culture, and it always has been for 4,000 or 5,000, however many years, and I think that rubs off in a certain way. I'm Aryan, that sort of. So you enjoy smugness and rudeness in the debate, because I think it doesn't make for good arguments, right? A smug opponent doesn't tend to be, and it's easy to pick them apart, and it's fun, and I suspect it's somewhat gratifying, the urge to dominate someone in this sort of intellectual whipping match. But what's the methodology, brother? What's the how do you strategize these things? And we'll come to the earlier sort of the subjects of your training and what you learned in the classical subjects and how you prepared. But I'm saying drop scene, you're ready for a debate with. How do you pick them? How do you call them out? You know, why is it that you because your call out is in a particular, it's a style. It's a very distinct yani. If I show your face to most people, they'd know you. Even if they wouldn't know your name, they would know, I've seen this guy somewhere. Anyone who's in that sort of religious or what's it called? The autistic debate space.
Debate bros, autistic debate bros.
Anyone who's been in this space knows your face or name, mashallah. And in that you've been, you've treaded in dangerous waters. You've called out a lot of dawa bros as well, and that's something that So how do you pick them? What's the call out like? Why do you call out? Because that's a very left sort of intrinsically feminine thing, no?
You mean Muslims, like Muslim liberals?
Anyway, calling out is it's an intrinsically, you know what I mean? Like why that, and how do you do it, and what's the plan, and then Muslims as well, maybe.
Yeah, with Muslims, the call out is people that I just deem to be really a bad influence. Like they are pushing liberalism and feminism in a very destructive way that opens the door to all kinds of further deviance over time. And they water down the religion in a way that will create or has created massive problems. Like in the US, for example, the community here, like in Pakistan, I'm sure you're wondering, like, why are the American Muslims so weird in certain things? This didn't happen overnight. It happened maybe over 20 years, since 9/11, but you had this kind of liberal imam archetype that has been put on a pedestal and been flushed with money, just showered with all kinds of money and resources, and chaplains and imams and sheikh or whatever title. Yeah. And they have been given this kind of prominent platform, and it's actually a psyop because it is tied to the U.S. government. It is tied to Rand, because you'll see this in one of the Rand reports, especially with the rise of the internet, that you can put these liberal imams as like models for the rest of the Muslim world. Like, oh, look at how if you are adopting these kinds of liberal Islamic principles of tolerance and feminism and liberalism, etc., you can also be respected and loved in, the seat of world power, which is America. And you have these prominent imams that are, going to the White House, and they're going to the iftars, and they're on the mainstream TV. Maybe they're even referenced in some of these shows, etc.
They get to go on podcasts, the big podcast.
The big podcast, yeah. So this is actually a deliberate effort
deliberate
tied to the
aside,
government.
Do you see no redeemable quality? Like, wouldn't a private email or reaching out to them through some brothers? Don't you think that would be? Or do you think that some of them, when you use the word psyop, it's a pretty loaded. You and I both know it's a pretty loaded sort of. You're suggesting something which gut feeling, gun to my head. I know what you're talking about. I believe in it to a large extent. But then you make excuses for your brother, and you want to make excuses for someone who is servicing the deen in some perverted way or another, and they might be going wrong on some key issues that will create problems down the line, and that you might have experienced growing up in this environment, knowing the exact where it went wrong. But given all those considerations, don't you think it's a bit? It's in bad spirit. Like, shouldn't you try to reach out to them privately? Develop a rapport with them and be like, maybe you're wrong in this. Do you think that would be the best approach for this, or is it counterproductive? Is it not practically feasible? What's stopping you from that?
Well, point number one is that this is not like an Islamic requirement to do amr bil ma'ruf wa nahi anil munkar, like to enjoin good and forbid evil. There's no requirement that, especially for someone that is pushing something wrong in public, in a deliberate way, intentional way, not like a random mistake. If they're doing that, then they should be called out publicly as well. They should be called and corrected, because if you don't publicly correct them, then people will see that and they will think that that is correct. So if, one of the big things in the US was the LGBT rights. Should Muslims support LGBT rights as gay marriage is being passed through? Because the US was anti-gay.
With the Umar right? Is that what you're referring to?
For example, yeah. So you had a whole class of imams in that group. It's a very tight group that decided altogether that Muslims have to support LGBT rights. And we at best, we can't be against it. We can't oppose it.
Sarsour?
Linda Sarsour, for example.
Like these people who are very close to the Democratic Party, basically, to that sort of Washington elite, the funding, sort of the places of funding and dispensation. In Pakistan, what we would call the NGO culture, where you get to, and I'm not using it in the sense of the actual word NGO, but this culture is called the NGO culture, where there's USAID involved in developmental programs and curriculum reimaginings and all this, everything that's weird. I know what you're talking about.
The same kind of programs that exist for NGO culture outside of the US is paralleled within the US. Inside the US, for Muslims. And again, it's on the basis of the idea. It's different from Europe, but in the US, they view the American Muslims as this kind of model that can be projected to the rest of the Muslim world as a kind of psyop, again, that, look at how prosperous the American Muslims are. It's because they make sure that whenever he's going out, speaking, the imam, his wife is standing next to him as his equal, for example. Or they don't agree with homosexuality, but they have gay friends, and they think that gay people should get married. There should be freedom to be gay, to be transgender, to be lesbian. Like he's a religious Muslim. He's a religious Muslim. He is an imam, and he has a gay friend, or he can sit down with a gay pastor and they can have a beautiful conversation and they're good friends. And the imam supports his friend's gay marriage, and they have like 2 husbands and they adopt a child, and the imam is perfectly fine with that, and this is beautiful. Like that's the model of tolerance and acceptance that this group is meant to project.
If it was some kind of other social political community leader from the Muslim neighborhoods or whatever, then you wouldn't have as big of a problem. But because it's an imam, it's somebody who has taken up the position of sheikh, right? Is that the big thing that irks you? Or would you equally and vehemently, as vehemently call out somebody who's like running for local mayoral office or something, some Pakistani uncle ji, who wants
we did call out Hamza
make...
Yusuf, for example. Hamza Yusuf, the Scottish PM. We called him out as well. He's not
Hamza
an imam.
Yusuf,
he's
the
not
Scottish pimp?
No, PM.
PM, right. I was like, what?
Not Hamza Yusuf in Zaytuna, not him.
I was like, what? No, yeah, the Scottish
PM.
Right, the PM, yeah, the funny guy.
Hamza Yusuf, we called him out. It's about influence. But yeah, it's a bigger threat. It's a bigger danger when there's the imam. But let me finish my point. Finish my point that I was making, that so they are promoting this, and it's something that is clearly contrary to Islam and could even reach the level of kufr. And to make something that's haram, make it halal. Like something that's haram, that LGBT, you're saying that Muslims should support this as a right for people to do, for people to practice this, and gay marriage should be supported. This is a serious thing. And so it is allowed, and
Pastor,
it is perfectly fine to call that out. How? What is harsh? So you think that we should be very kind and gentle with those who are saying Muslims should support gay marriage?
You didn't catch that?
Yeah, I got it, but I'm giving the response.
Pastor, don't you think you're being too harsh? Why are you gay? You are gay. I understand what you're saying. I completely understand where you're coming from, and that's a natural instinct. But here's my argument. Here's my counter to that. We have these cast of characters.
I didn't even finish before you give the counter argument.
Sorry.
So even full it's support, not required. It's not required to advise them privately, but these individuals were advised privately. They were by me. They were
really.
Yeah.
What was the response? Lukewarm.
The response was, well, we have to be practical at this time.
Oh, it's dismissive. It was
dismissive. Yeah.
Oh no.
So they want you to approach them privately. Like the biggest deviants, the biggest reformers, they want you to limit it to a private conversation. Why? Because if you speak publicly, they know that they cannot defend their position in front of a Muslim audience. So they can only bully people into silence by saying, well, why didn't you approach us privately? They want the private conversation so they can maintain that public image of Islamic piety and authority. If people are questioning them and saying, no, actually, you're pushing something extremely wrong, then that will cause a scandal for them and they will lose authority. And it's an issue that they cannot defend themselves publicly. They cannot give a reasoned argument why Muslims should support gay marriage. Like, this is unacceptable. In fact, there was an attempt. Like, so Muhammad Hijab, brother Hijab, he did interview Jonathan Brown, who is part of this group, and he was the one that they kind of put out on, you know, on the limb, out on a limb to defend intellectually this idea of Muslims supporting gay marriage. So Muhammad Hijab asked him in this interview, don't you think it goes contrary to the sunnah of Lut, alayhi salam, like Lut the prophet, to support gay marriage as a right? Don't you think it goes against the sunnah? And then the response of Jonathan Brown was something that became a meme, basically, that Lut alayhi salam didn't talk about gay marriage. Right. So that such a ridiculous thing, like such a bizarre and ridiculous response that went viral. Like, that's when they tried to defend the indefensible, they get made to look like clowns. The problem
is that they do not have the proper equipment. You see.
Well, I'm glad that this is like such a good time for you. For us, we're like fighting for the future of Islam in America. But it's all just memes.
You see, they do not have the proper equipment. So they use this. This is a carrot pasta. Pasta, maybe. No, I agree with you. And maybe I think I'm less sympathetic to the plight of the American Muslims. Not because I'm not sympathetic to it overall, but because they're so far away and,
wow.
I mean, out of sight, out of mind. And then what you've had come out, honestly, like, we've all had the fatigue with the American Islam. We've all had it. I know what you're talking about. But the counter is, and full support, sir, for everything else, but the counter is, we've had some of these imams, some of these shuyukh, some of these duat here as well, who've had like wacky ideas about, maybe liberal democracy is the way to go. And, we've had them. We've had our fair share in Pakistan as well. And for some reason, the reaction was so harsh, like harsher than maybe necessary, that what would happen is it would elevate them into a position of sort of sainthood for a certain class of people, and it would allow them to escape the religious matrix that they have to, with the framework with which they have to remain, and then they become even wackier. You push them away so far, they become even wackier. As opposed to
that's called the
Streisand
effect.
Exactly.
The Streisand effect.
Exactly. So instead of pulling them down and closer together, like look at Mufti Abu Layth, for example, right? That guy was the whipping boy for forever, right? Everybody was jumping on him. And he was a goofy guy. He made some funny whatever, But isn't that a consequence of the medium? And he's come around. He's sort of, he's growing up. He has daughters and kids, and he's realizing and he's seen what's been going on in Palestine, and you see in some of his more recent stuff, I've heard at least, that he's become more sort of rooted in the tradition and sort of conservative, and he's changing his ideas.
I mean, that was an example of someone who was called out very harshly, and I think he became irrelevant because there was literally, like, I've never seen such a very clear example of someone's career being ended by a single video. There was like a video, Islam According to Abu Layth, and it just compiled all of his positions.
Was that the Sunnah Discourse guys?
Yeah. The Sunnah Discourse guys. Yeah. So that video, ended his career.
Sunni Defense at one point or something?
Yeah, they changed, they rebranded. It's discourse now, not defense. But the thing was that video, very clear cut, ended the guy's career. It's very, you could say it's harsh. Why? Because it's not providing the context. It's only providing the highlights. Like,
yes, it's a bit
what
brutal.
Do you think about? Yeah, it was very brutal and effective. And the other thing is that the people that I am criticizing are usually they're already famous. They're already world famous. They already have a massive following. Me criticizing them is not going to add to their fame. It's actually going to detract from it.
No,
But I'm
also
conscious of the Streisand effect. You can't give prominence to every Tom, Dick, and Harry.
It's not just the Streisand effect I'm arguing. I'm also arguing that if they had, and I'm assuming all these people have redeemable qualities, and they have the potential to come back to the fold of the tradition and within the Ahl Sunnah and give up these sort of goofy ideas about political practicality and whatever. Is that little sliver of redemption you lose because now they're in that other group? You force them into hanging out with those gay pastors and gay imams and all that gay crowd, that you force them to sort of internalize those goofy ideas that maybe they didn't really believe. Is there a potential for that? I mean, shouldn't there be some sort of brotherly way to figure this stuff out? Isn't like Eddie the Joe Rogan of the sort of the Dawa scene? Can't he get you guys to come together, play some judo or whatever, and then everybody makes amends and then
you have. So there's several things that can be said. First of all, sometimes the best way to correct someone is actually a smack. Is actually a smack across the head. So this is actually a statement from Imam Ghazali in Ihya Ulumuddin, his masterpiece work. And he talks about, the correct way to correct someone. How do you actually correct someone who is sinning and you know that they're committing a sin? And he gives stages. He gives a number of stages. So at the first stage of correcting someone, you don't even necessarily correct them. You just say that the right thing in their presence. Like, oh, didn't you know that taking riba loans, like this is something wrong? Like very general, so that they don't become defensive, basically, but they just hear it. Maybe they're completely ignorant. If that doesn't work, then you progress to the next stage. You very gently say, by the way, brother, you're taking this loan or you're selling alcohol or whatever it may be. You have, this is not appropriate, for example. Then you progress, like you become more and more harsh when the person does not take the advice and doesn't change their ways. And so we have this kind of wrong attitude that, gentleness is what changes people in all circumstances. No, like gentleness to a certain level, yes. But if it doesn't bring the desired result, then you have to become harsher. You have to up to the point where you're even abusing the person. Like you can even insult the person. And this is what Ghazali says, even insulting, use names against them, mock them, shame them. Why? Because the desired result is the salvation of the person, and also those that he'll influence by, doing this sin. The assumption is that it's open. Like if it's something private, then you won't expose that. But if it's something open, then shaming is appropriate because they're influencing other people to adopt something that is impermissible. So this is actually a misconception that we always have to be gentle and accommodating and tolerant. No, this is actually not the appropriate way to correct people. There has to be gradations. Don't jump to insulting people at the beginning, but every context has an appropriate approach.
So in this, if I had to contextualize it in the modern sort of reply format that is standard with the videos or the PDFs, right? Actual PDFs. That would be so initially, if you discuss the idea of acceptability of gay marriage and integration of them into polite society, and you address that general idea, and you sort of indirectly challenge the ideas being presented by so and so sheikh, right? Then you ramp it up a little. You've sent them the private email. You've sent them the little five pointer whatever. These are the big problems that you're causing. Then you make the direct video. So and so sheikh is doing X and Y and Z and A and B and C, and these things are messed up, and this is why they're wrong, and they should correct their ways. And then eventually you can you call them a Scottish pimp, right? That's the end. That's the sort of the. I'm kidding. That's when you go to the nth. What I'm saying is, is that during that process, there is something innately, to me at least, and these are my sensibilities completely. There's something innately feminine about calling someone out. It doesn't sit well with me. Why can't
Do you know women?
Huh?
Don't you know the stereotype about women? The stereotype about women is that when they're in a gathering together, they all smile and say, "Oh, I love you. Oh, your hair is so wonderful. Oh, where'd you get that blouse? It is so looks so good on you." And then in private, they say, "Oh, do you see how ugly her hair was? Do you see how messed up her blouse was?" So in public, it's all niceties. It's all flattery. But in private, that's when the gossip comes out.
And they're all besties and
they're all besties in public. And smiling. Oh, mashallah, Sheikh al-Islam, so-and-so. His lecture was so beautiful. Oh, let's have a nice panel where we're all talking about. And then privately, they're all gossiping about each other. So the feminine behavior is actually not to be direct. Not to say,
love that you're
again,
debating
if it's
just a random instinct of mine.
I agree with you. Like in a private, something is private. Like someone is privately committing a sin. No problem. It could even be public. Someone is publicly committing a sin, but they are not trying to justify that. They are not trying to, like, for example, I'll give you a very real example. Sneeko. Sneeko is a new Muslim.
Nice.
And I've praised him a lot. And he had that amazing debate performance. But some of the things that he's putting out is not halal. It's not good.
No.
And does that mean that I will make a huge video denouncing Sneeko and this deviant? How could he? Like, that's not correct because it's just a sin. It is public. And I would caveat any praise that I make of Sneeko that he's not a model Muslim. Like, he's not a model that you could say, oh, he's like a sheikh or he's like an imam or he's someone that you should model your life after. He's a struggling Muslim. But he doesn't cross the line. Sneeko does not cross the line and say, okay, for example, I'm posing in a picture with a woman who's not appropriately dressed. He's not saying this is halal. This is correct. This is something that you should. Do you see what I'm saying? So there has to be an understanding of the context. There has to be an understanding of the direction that people are going as well, because Sneeko is going in a more conservative direction. Like, for God's sake, he's like trying to justify underage marriage in public and debating it like with one of the most popular YouTubers.
No, so
there's a clear direction.
Penguin Zero agreed to that because he's like, he's like up here and Sneeko is like, is deplatformed on a lot of things, I'm thinking. And
yeah, he's completely deplatformed. But my point is that there's a direction that he's going. Now, if Sneeko, may Allah protect him, changes direction for some reason, and he starts justifying and saying that, I actually think that it's fine to mix with females and hijab is not really required and gambling might be acceptable in certain situations. He was offered, by the way, $20 million for promotion of a gambling company, and he refused $20 million on the basis of Islam. He said, I'm Muslim now, I can't accept $20 million. So that's not a small thing. So look at the direction that he's going. Now look at some of these imams that I call out. They are promoting something as Islamic that is so destructive, that is so like the liberalization of Muslims to such an extent that not only are they adopting feminism, they're also adopting LGBT. These are the kinds of things. You're too deadpan. Sometimes I can't tell that you're being sarcastic.
The
audience might not know.
No, at this point I don't care because this is like 5, 6, 7 years in the making this podcast.
Yeah, that's true.
No, but this thing with Sneeko, that's insane. $20 million. That's actually insane. That's actually a real mashallah. I mean, may Allah bless him. And this kind of distinguishment between halal risk and haram risk can bless generations at times. And maybe this is the changing point for this guy. He said, and rejecting that and, discerning between another funny observation that I made, that someone made to me, and then we had a bit of a laugh. When you made Al-Asna, right? So Al-Asna al-Haq is the one time that Umar was wrong. And then, you know what I mean? Like, it's not one time, but one of the few times where he's wrong. And Why? Didn't you think it through, or did you feel like, I don't know? Did you fit?
Well,
What was the thing
depends on
about
what you mean by wrong. I wouldn't say that he was
Yeah,
wrong.
he didn't-
I would
he
say that
didn't-
his advice wasn't necessarily taken.
I mean, he
But
was,
the sentiment was, that's the correct sentiment to have, and that was part of his zeal. He's just become Muslim, and he wants to show, let's go and pray in the haram, even though they're attacking us and they're abusing us, and it's a danger. But that is how, his iman and his zeal for fighting for Islam and representing Islam, even when it's a threat to our safety, let's do that. So yeah, it might not be the most practical option, and it wasn't taken up at that particular time. But that sentiment of it's contrary to a very practical, safe mindset that has been very destructive, in my opinion, because you can be overly safe. You can be overly concerned with practicality that you completely lose the principle. And that's what we wanted the organization, the institute, to represent. It's more practical to just try to find any like rukhsa or any kind of loophole and say that, yeah, Islam, maybe in certain contexts we can accept this or that, just for the sake of being safe and not being on the opposite end of the liberal West. Yeah, if you take that approach, eventually you're going to wipe out all of Islam. Like, that kind of practicality leads to the erasure of all Islam. So the Institute very deliberately and mindfully wanted to throw that mindset out, that, okay, practicality has its limits. And the statement of Umar radiallahu anhu, alasna al-haq, like this rhetorical question, are we not on the truth? Should we not be bold? And why are we just praying by ourselves in our houses in Mecca? Let's go pray in the haram, even though the Quraysh are coming and they're beating us and they are harassing us and even killing us. Let's stand for the truth. And that's the kind of mindset that, because in our world today, there is danger, there is the threat of being killed, there is the threat of being losing your life, and you're arrested. That's the threat. But you have to just break through that at some point.
Even
at
livelihood.
Some point.
Even if you go on the lowest level, you can just take away your livelihood. They can unplatform you, deplatform you, whatever, unperson you. And if anything, I think the fact that you're on a watch list is maybe a testament to being on the haqq, if anything. And a lot of the shuyukh that you call out, they're with the institution, they're at the state dinners and iftars, and maybe.
Yeah, they're making prayers in Congress, and one day you have Netanyahu there, and then next day you have the imam there making a prayer for peace. So what does that tell you? No, that's it. I can understand. I think in the context of what you've grown up in and what you've experienced, and a man cannot escape, his temporal, spatial sort of reality and where you are geographically. And I think maybe that zeal is required. Maybe American Islam has been very safe. Maybe in your experience. I wouldn't say it's just American Islam. I think this is a global phenomenon.
Of course.
I think it's a global.
Anything that happens in America is going to have some sort of trickle-down effect. Agreed 100%. I think American imams have had a lot of impact on Muslim youth in actual Muslim countries as well, on a significant, especially English savvy, internet savvy sort of young people in any professional sort of. They'll always say something like, "Oh, so and so sheikh, he really touches my heart," or whatever, and I don't like the Maulvi here or whatever. Maulvi, this word Maulvi. Of course, it's Farsi.
Mullah, yeah.
Yeah, Mullah. I don't like so and so Mullah, and I like so and so Imam from Kansas or whatever. I know what you're talking about. Maybe that the last, and I think this is a very war on terror experience. This is a very, very post 9/11 sort of paradigm that has been created, and I think it's been a purposeful injection of a certain amount of modernity and liberal thought via the imams.
Well, 9/11, like if we go with the assumption that 9/11 ultimately was a false flag and it was meant to create this global reform of Islam and dominance of the Muslim world, like let's just go with that assumption. It couldn't have happened without years of selling out and reform and basically creating an ummah that is very mentally colonized, very weak. Like that kind of trick that kind of deception would not have been effective if they have anticipated that the Muslims were not weak mentally and that they wouldn't fall for it and they would stand up against this kind of incursion from the West. Then 9/11 wouldn't have been effective. It wouldn't have created this war on terror that has led to millions of Muslims' deaths, not to mention the global reform of Islam. This project of reforming Islam, whether in Pakistan, whether in Malaysia, wherever, is justified because of terrorism. Like this idea of terrorism, this is the biggest problem the Ummah has,
but
allegedly.
Even the terrorism narrative has run its course now. Now it's fake and gay. Nobody accepts it anymore.
Well, yeah, but it should have been fake and gay from the beginning, you know.
Unfortunately, I know what you mean, but like people like you, I mean,
and the proof, by the way, that it's not just seen as fake and gay. By the way, I say my rebuttal to that is, if that were the case, then why did so many Muslims fall for COVID? I'm not saying that COVID is not a real disease. Like, yeah, it's a real disease. But did it justify those kinds of measures that were taken where the whole world has to be locked down? You have to cancel Ramadan. You have to cancel like Taraweeh prayers. You have cancel Hajj, close the masajid, everything. Shut down travel, lock down in your house. Was that justified by the disease? No. And now the science, the experts are admitting that, like Fauci has testified to Congress that a lot of the rules he just made up, or he doesn't know where they came from. Like, what's the scientific justification for like 6 feet of separation?
Wear a mask. I never said that.
Yeah, wearing a mask, the 6 feet distancing rule. That, like, how for 2 years at these local masajid, I had to pray with these huge gaps, 6 foot gap. To pray my prayers. So this is like many Muslims fell for that.
But that would be
that shows that it's not like that kind of not superficial, but that inferiority complex is still very strong, if not stronger now than it was in 9/11. That's the disappointing thing. I was so disappointed by the response of these institutions and a lot of imams that I respect. I highly respected them, but they were not willing to stand up against the COVID tyranny. I lost a lot of respect for that, especially in the US, because in the US, you had, especially Texas, even the government wasn't shutting down masajid. Even the government wasn't saying of Texas, the local government, that you have to close the place of prayer or the worship center or the mosque for COVID reasons. Even they didn't do it, but the imams proactively shut down the masjid, even though it was not required by law. Why? Because, we want to be safe. We want to be safe from this deadly virus.
That's one way.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, we have a lot of fake and gay people in Texas. So.
I think it's the liberal cities like Houston and Austin and
that's all of them.
Yeah,
Dallas, Austin, Houston, some San Antonio. Like that's all of Texas basically. That's where 90% of the population is. The rest of Texas is a huge landmass, but it's rural and it's very sparse. And not many Muslims are like living in the smaller cities and in the backwaters of Texas. It's just the big cities, Dallas, Houston. Houston had a gay mayor. Like, we had a lesbian mayor at one point. So it's not as conservative as you might think. Despite that, we're still more conservative than California or New York or New Jersey. So.
No, I'm sorry to hear that. That's really disappointing. Do you ever think about this? Have you like in the whites, they've already started with the passport bros. Do you think, and I've noticed that trend has trickled down to the Dawa scene, the Muslim men wanting to move back into South and East Asia and maybe Central Asia sometimes in the Middle East. Do you see that for yourself? Do you see that was a potential future for you, that maybe you immigrate?
For me personally?
Yeah.
Hijra, yes, but for marriage purposes, I didn't have that plan.
No. Not like a classical dawa, bro. A passport bro.
Passport bro.
But like, I mean, in the sense of like, maybe you want a different future. Does Iran? I mean, at this point, unfortunately, you've chosen to convert to the Sunni tradition, and Iran, is that Iran a good sort of, given the turmoil, because that's your country of origin? How would you go back?
Yeah, it's difficult to go back because also I've criticized the government there. So it's kind of might be dangerous to go back. But
Have you thought about Malaysia
there are
or
other
something?
yeah, there are other Muslim countries that you can attempt to go to. But I'm not sure. Right now, the main thing is that my family is here, like my parents are here, and I don't want to leave them. So, but in the future, I do have plans to make hijrah. We'll see what happens in the meantime, inshallah.
I would have said Pakistan maybe like 5 years ago, but no thanks. Not anymore. You can.
Yeah, well, hopefully we can come visit and see what it's
You
like.
can come visit. I think you'll like it. It has redeeming qualities. It's not bad. The food's all right. The weather is a bit harsh. I don't know, but you're pretty used to the heat already, mashallah.
Yeah.
If Pakistan can resolve some of its core issues, honestly, and those very solvable, Pakistan is a great place, honestly. But there's some very core problems that we have we have a very like entrenched deep state, and there's a very corrupt sort of social elite who are very liberal. And
That's pretty much every Muslim country at this point. Almost every Muslim country has the same issue.
Yeah, and they've sort of, and the past, I would say the past 20, 25 years have been particularly egregious. It's been a slow process in these 76 odd years, but the past 20, 25 years have been the worst. The war and terror years, they've been the worst. Is there anything you have to plug?
Just Haqiqatjou.
I'm kidding. You don't have to plug anything, dude. You're huge. Well, I hope we can sit down and talk with you again over the internet as well as physically, inshallah, in Pakistan at some point.
Yeah, I'd love to have more discussions with you, definitely. And
thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your time.
Love that.
That was Daniel Haqiqatjou, Daniel, as we would call him. Thank you for your time, brother. I asked some probing questions. I apologize, after the fact. But I have some more questions. I have more questions, and I hope, whenever you have time, you can give us time. Shout out to Bhedia. Thank you for organizing this. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Jazakallah khair.